Welcome. Thank you for joining our question and answer portion for today's tutorial. My name is Rob Cairns and I'll be one of the moderators. I'm the Vice President of the Ontario Guild of Handbell Ringers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Manny Sun, and I am excited to be joining Rob as your co-moderator for today's Q&A session. I am a member of the OGEHR's Communications Committee, and as the email coordinator, I'm in touch with our membership on a weekly basis.
Today's tutorial on writing for bells, how to get your ideas on paper, was produced by Brittany McCorriston. In addition to this tutorial, Brittany has produced a tutorial on Introduction to Notation Software, and that one is already available on our website if you missed it. Brittany also gave a tutorial on how to get involved with the virtual handbell project, which she is producing, with the help of 30 OGEHR ringers who did indeed get involved. Brittany hopes that the final product will be available for listening pleasure in the next couple of weeks. And as mentioned, at the end of her tutorial, do look for her upcoming tutorial on notation software part 2. This is taking place on February 27th, and you don't need to have watched part 1 if you would like to participate in that tutorial.
So Brittany has been playing handbells for over 10 years and is working towards a Bachelors of Music in Contemporary Writing and Production at Berklee College of Music. Brittany specializes in music notation and editing and is currently an assistant editor for Berklee Press, where she has worked on over 15 different publications. Brittany has a passion for teaching and believes that fluency in music technology is beneficial to all music learners. Welcome, Brittany. We're very lucky to have you join us again for another fantastic tutorial session. So at this point, we will be taking questions submitted via the Zoom text chat.
We have a question from Lisa, and she's asking, can you talk a little bit about the challenges of arranging for handbells specifically?
Sure. So that's a great question. Some of the things that I've noticed specifically with handbell music, and this is like just my experience, the pieces that I've played, is kind of, the first thing is just like kind of keeping it interesting. And this is like a challenge with all stuff, with like all music, but specifically with handbells, because it's only one instrument and like kind of one sound, you have an additional kind of like barrier to cross with that. Because you don't have as many kind of like tools that you can use. So some of the ways that you can overcome that is thinking about different techniques, changing things up every four to 8 bars. You'll see often like counter melodies added. So always kind of like having that in the back of your mind. Another challenge that I see a lot in different handbell writing is it's kind of, I like to use the word like dense and sparse with handbell music. And again, it's kind of just the range that the bells are very high. You're kind of missing what we call like the entire low end of our frequency spectrum. And even if you're with a smaller choir, just 3 octaves versus 5 octaves. So with that, how a lot of arrangers and composers compensate is by doing what we call like thicker voicings, which is when you have that like octave doubling in there, or you add the 3rd or the 5th of the chord to kind of help. And so instead of having maybe like on one beat, just the melody or like 2 notes, you'll have like 3 or 4, and there's like 2 C's and 2 A's and 2 G's. And that kind of is another technique that a lot of handbell composers and arrangers will use to kind of overcome that. Those are like the 2 big ones that I often think about when I see different music. And
yeah, actually, that is interesting, Brittany, where you mentioned that arranging for handbells. Handbells is really a one instrument played by multiple people. And so you don't have that luxury of different timbres and using different voices like in an orchestra or a band. So what about, you mentioned using techniques. Do you often think about adding chimes or even secondary instruments into your arrangements?
Yeah, for sure. It's always like, whenever I write, I try and write from a very like practical standpoint. And so oftentimes before I write, I know what's going to be available to me. And so I write based off of that. it's always really good. And like handbells are not to know what's going to potentially be available to you and what the level of your players are or what you're expecting them to be. So that way, like if you have a choir in your arsenal, like you have a handbell choir and there's a church and you're with a church and you have a church choir, for sure, if you're writing something that also has lyrics, like add them in. If you play to the strength of your players, if some of your players can double on another instrument, if it's piano or a wind instrument, or even just to add some kind of percussion part, that can also add to your piece. Another kind of challenge that I thought of when you mentioned that, Manny, is we'll often see like complicated like bell switches or bell sharing. Try and think that out ahead of time. And so oftentimes when I'm writing, I try and go through and be like, okay, is this actually like a feasible thing? And if I can't figure that out myself because it's like just a skill that I don't have, then I go and ask the person that will know. So like for me, I'm small, I can't really hold like the big bass bells that are down in the lower octave. Like I have to do like the 2-hand thing. So if I don't know if like a change is actually possible, then I'm going to ask someone who I know has more experience with that than I do. Or same with like 4-in-hand, I feel pretty good at it, but if I'm not quite sure if I can do it, but I think it's still possible, then just kind of bringing in someone else who might know and can figure it out and see, and provide suggestions. So it's often like a process of like back and forth of like thinking through, I think this is possible, but if it's not, double check with another player and always get that insight.
Right, that makes sense, right? If you're playing, even if you're arranging a part for an instrument, and it's an instrument you're not familiar with, then don't be afraid to ask someone who does play that part and can give you some advice. So that's
I mean, like, I'm a bassoon player, and so like my job as a student right now half the time is just giving feedback on people's bassoon writing, because it's just an instrument that people don't have a lot of experience with, but something that I'm an expert in. So people come to me for asking how to write for bassoon, how to improve their writing, and I go to them when I don't know how to voice something for guitar. So it's always like a very collaborative thing.
Right, that totally makes sense, and it all applies even to handbells. Thanks, Brittany.
I remember my 8:30 in the morning secondary instrument bassoon classes fondly. Yes, with our coffees getting ready. The discussion you were just having, it leads really well into a question by Elizabeth. And she's asking, are there any kind of specific do's and don'ts that you would use for handbell writing? You talked earlier about going ahead and doubling at the octaves and things like that, which are kind of like traditional harmony rules, which we're told not to do. But in handbells, you actually do want to do it because you want that added texture. Are there any other things like that you would comment on?
Specific do's and don'ts would probably adhere to kind of like technical limitations. And so I would always say, find out as much as you can about the technical limitations of whatever instrument you're writing for. So specifically for handbells, the echoes, those work best in like your mid-range and lower bells. And same with your thumb damps, they work better in like the upper bells. So kind of knowing that is a really good skill. And with that also comes notation. And so when I give a part to a player, and with handbells, it's everyone gets the same part. The two things that I look for, or that I always hope for, is that one, I don't get any questions about what I'm asking them to do or play. And two, I hope that as they're playing it and reading it for the first time, they're smiling, they're having fun, because that tells me that I wrote a good part. If they're kind of like looking at it very closely, or like they can't quite figure it out, that's like a sign for me to be like, oh, this might be like, go back to the drawing board. But how that plays in with like do's and don'ts is just to be really, really careful with your notation, and make sure it's clear, sure things are spaced out. Especially with like handbell music, things can get really squished really fast. So always giving those like clear directions, even if it's something that seems really simple, just double check, like, is the time signature there? Is the key signature there? Is there a tempo? always give a tempo marking too. I don't know why people will just put like adagio or just put like Leggero or Dolce. Like it is so helpful to also have like a specific metronome marking, because then it just like leaves everything open for interpretation, and that's like the last thing you want when you're giving out a new piece of music. Is it's your piece of music, you just worked and spent like your heart and soul on it, and you want it to be played the way that you wrote it. So give your players that opportunity to do that right off on the first try.
And the nice part is when you take your piece to them and they're playing it, you do get that reaction, and then you can make little notes, and then you can give another version to go back if they do have some specific things, like, not marting really low bells, because that's not good for them, and, stuff like that. So that's really a good process to be able to go through. So
that actually brings up another question. As an arranger, as you said, you have often a particular ensemble in mind, a particular like a 3 or a 5 octave choir with a certain amount of equipment, which is a great luxury if you do have a group with, with access to equipment. What about in the situation where you don't actually have handbells and you don't have access to a choir, and you're just sort of writing something for the love of it without access to the instrument? How can I know that this is going to sound good or that it's going to work? Do you have any advice there, Brittany?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for handbells specifically, I use for notation, I use a software called Finale, because they have a built-in handbell sound. I don't know if some of the other ones have that yet or not, because I'm mostly a Finale user, but that's like my go-to. And so what happens is when you put something in like to a notation software, most of them have like a playback feature. Some of them are automatically piano, but oftentimes you can set that instrument. So that's why I like Finale, because it actually has a handbell sound. It doesn't have like all of the techniques, but it can give you a good idea and a good starting point until you can kind of get your arrangement to an actual, like in front of an actual group of people, an actual choir. So whenever I'm composing and arranging like that, I do start in a notation software, and I try and like listen back. So I often find that if I can find a good balance of, I go in with an idea and I know the technical limitations of whatever instrument I'm writing for, and then I'm also listening back if I can through my computer, it gives me not always a perfect representation, but a pretty good one to know that what I'm writing will work, and then I can take it in front of live players and really test it.
That actually kind of leads into another question, which we just had about the next tutorial, talking about what sort of notation software are you going to use when you do that tutorial?
Yeah, so the next tutorial, I am thinking of kind of doing, this is like right now, it can totally change. So if anyone has like written anything and has used MuseScore from the first one and you want to send it to me, I am more than happy to go through it and analyze it and use it in the video. If you have materials, don't feel pressured to. If you don't, my next plan is to kind of talk about, I was going to arrange something on the spot. I haven't picked a piece yet, and probably just do like 16, maybe 24 bars of it. And that's probably going to be in Finale, just because that's what I'm most confident using, but I'll still be going through inserting techniques. Finale has a really good thing where, you know how you have the bell chart at the beginning of handbell pieces? They actually have a plugin that allows you to do that. So after you write something, you can run it through this extra piece of software, and it will insert it into your score. So that was kind of the path I'm going to take for the next one. It will most likely be in Finale, but it will still be, I'm going to talk about MIDI keyboards as well, and how you get a keyboard hooked up into your software. So there's going to be kind of concepts that apply for all softwares. But yeah, that's the vision right now. It hasn't been recorded yet. So if anyone has suggestions or questions, like send me an email. I'm more than happy to include some of it.
Awesome. So everybody, make sure you send all of your compositions and all of your arrangements to Brittany for her to review in advance of our next session. So Brittany, for those of us who maybe have a little less musical training, I mean, harmonic analysis, some of the stuff that you were doing can be pretty intimidating. Is this something that I really need to have a good grasp on if I plan to arrange or compose music?
Absolutely not, but it can only help you, really. Every little, we often talk about this idea of like this arranger's toolbox, and anything that you can add to this box is just another thing that you can kind of pull out and use in your thing. So if you have a good understanding of theory, then it will definitely help you and give you more avenues to explore. And if you don't, that's perfectly okay too. Even if you're not planning on taking on arranging or composing anything within the near future, there's still a lot of benefit as just a player to be able to listen to a piece of music and identify what is in it. And that can, whether it's with musical terms or just everyday terms, like there's a new texture, there's a new sound, there was a dynamic or like a volume change if you don't even feel comfortable using dynamics yet. But there's a really good practice in that, because what that kind of goes into is when you get into a rehearsal space is now you have the ability to kind of listen more critically to what's going on around you, and you can listen for what the person across the room is playing, and what are their bells doing, and how does my part fit into something else, especially with bells because you only have two notes. It's a really good skill to kind of be able to do that and bring out certain parts of the music more and help realize what a composer has written.
I suppose ultimately, if you're a beginner, it really is a matter of just getting in there and playing around with some stuff and seeing what sounds good. And then you start to build up your theory knowledge after that by actually having a look at what you've done. When you're doing a variation, do you just alter one element at a time, or will you take a few steps towards creating a new variation?
It really depends on what my end goal might be. I am really into changing the groove of a piece right now. And so the groove is kind of like, it's a little bit different. It's similar to like style. So like you can have something that's like pop or rock or jazz or funk. And so I really like taking pop tunes and throwing them into like 60s, 50s jazz style. Like that's like my little niche right now at this current moment. So when it comes to like, if you don't have like a goal in mind, what I try and set that's like my first recommendation. The other thing when it comes to like writing like variations and stuff is keep it simple. Maybe like you kind of want to add something every 4 to 8 bars, and when I say add something, adding something can also mean taking away. So let me change that. So you kind of want to change something every 4 to 8 bars. And so that could be as simple as the melody is it's just the straight melody. So then now I'm going to add thirds to it for 4 bars. And then we're going to keep it in thirds, and maybe we'll add a new bass element, or maybe instead of the bass playing whole notes, we'll switch it to half notes instead. So really simple things like that. I usually start with changing the melody is like the first thing that I will do. So that can be changing the melody is in some of the notes. It can be changing some of the rhythms, changing sometimes the harmonies, the underlying harmony that goes with it. So that's like the chord progression. That's kind of where I start, and then I kind of go from there and see where else can I add. Should I add another instrument in here? Should I add a different technique? But usually you kind of want to start with the biggest question I always ask myself is, where is the melody? What is the melody doing? How can it be heard? And if I'm going to be adding in all these other things, like how can I make sure that that's still being present? Because that's always the important thing in any piece of music is your melody. If that's buried, then
the changing of styles that you mentioned is exactly what you showed when you did the example at the end of your video. You started out with this kind of 1940s Andrews Sisters kind of style, and then you jumped to a completely different style, which from my point of view kind of felt like you were jumping 10 years from that. And I think we were talking before, and you mentioned that it was kind of a boogie woogie style you were going after in that second one. So there's, I suppose, one way that you can show a variation.
Yeah, for sure. For that song in particular, I'm not going to lie, that assignment, one of the criteria of it was to have something that we call hybrid styles, meaning that it had to change at some point into a different style. And that was what I chose. So you don't always have to have more than one, but yeah, changing the groove and the style is just like a really fun thing to do. It doesn't always work out, but it's fun when you can pull it off. So
cool.
Well, it did in that one.
Yeah, I actually have a my own preference right now is taking 80s synth pop and turning it into bossa nova.
nice.
It's pretty hilarious, and everything ends up sounding like elevator music. So Brittany, when you are creating a plan, it sounds like there's a lot of work going into kind of building an outline. Is it like, would you think that it's similar to like writing an essay? Do you actually sit down and kind of develop the plot of your piece? Kind of hit, like writing an essay, you've got your outlines, you kind of hit the high points, and then you kind of start developing the ideas. Do you do this, like create a plan on paper first before you ever go to your notation software?
I do personally, and I will like start off by saying that everyone's process is different. So like go ahead, try my process. If it doesn't work, try something else. But yeah, I do both like an analysis of the original song, and then I kind of have an idea of what I want, and then I'll do an analysis of kind of where I'm planning to go. And that analysis is actually not musically related. Like it's written out, and I will use words to describe what I'm trying to achieve, like what the current is and what I'm trying to achieve. And then I also have, I'll either grab a lead sheet, which is lead sheet is a song that it's just like the melody and the chords. So if I can find that online or through one of my, like I have access to the library at my school that has quite a few of them. So if I can find that, then I'll use it. Or I can look up the chords and transcribe the song. So, and with that, I will kind of just go in with manuscript paper, and I just do dots because I'm really lazy. So I will just pull out, if there's like a really nice counter line that I like, or I really like the bass line or something in there that I want to for sure keep, I'll make sure that I transcribe that, and I'll just get the notes out really quickly and kind of save it for later. And then after I have all that kind of compiled, then I move into my notation software.
We have a couple more kind of more technical questions about composing in the chat, but I think we might leave those for our roundtable after session when they can ask you directly. So I'm going to jump to a question from Lloyd, and he asks, are there other handbell players at Berklee that you get a chance to work with that you can discuss things with?
No, I wish. I do wish. Berklee is constantly adding new principal instruments, but handbells is not one of them. There are a couple local choirs that I have looked into and been involved with very briefly, but nothing significant.
Okay, so we want to send you on a mission from OGEHR to Berklee to blaze a path to handbells at Berklee.
I mean, I know a harmonica principal, so if they can have a harmonica principal, they can have a handbell principal, in my mind.
Definitely. I think probably this is a good place for us to wrap up the kind of formal Q&A part of our discussion. So I think this was a really good follow-up to the tutorial that Brittany presented today.
Yes, thank you very much, Brittany. We've had a lot to think about, and you've have a lot of acquired knowledge that I think all of us here appreciate very much. Thanks, Brittany. Please, for everybody, please mark next Saturday. Next Saturday? Is it already the end of January? Gosh. Well, anyways, next Saturday, February 6th, 2 p.m. Is our next OGEHR handbell tutorial. Dominique Moreau will be joining us again, presenting a tutorial on meters. What are they and what do they tell you about the music? We hope you will encourage your OGEHR friends to join us for both the video and the subsequent Q&A session.
Thank you for watching Brittany's tutorial this afternoon. We would like to thank everybody for coming and participating on behalf of the Ontario Guild of English Handbell Ringers. Thank you.